Hi everyone, I'm Caroline. Thanks so much for joining me here today. We are officially in what I am now proclaiming to be my favorite season of the year content-wise, which is end of year, beginning of the year content. We're getting the wrap-ups, we're getting the refreshes, the resets, and most importantly, we're getting everyone's favorite books from 2024, and that's what I'm here to do with you all today. 2024 is one of the best reading years that I've had in recent memory. I am personally someone who I judge the success of a reading year not on the quantity of books I read, but the quality. And every single 5-star that I gave out this year felt like a new all-time favorite, which hasn't happened to me in years. Like, I haven't had a 5-star that has felt like a new all-time favorite in years. And if you are someone who, I don't know, if you're someone who's like in the bookish space, or you're just someone who reads and thinks about what they're reading a lot, you'll know the difference between your normal run-of-the-mill 5-star and then a new all-time favorite 5-star. So I'm going to tell you about all my 5 stars that I gave out in 2024 today. There are 7 of them. I have ranked them from 7 to 1. I'm going to start with number 7, which now that I've given you this whole big lecture on the difference between like normal 5 stars and all-time favorites, I don't know that I would call this a new all-time favorite, but it was a 5-star and it was a favorite of 2024, and it is Middle Game by Seanan McGuire. Which now I have to pitch Middle Game to you. We are following these 2 twins named Roger and Dodger, who have been born and bred with the sole purpose of one day destroying the universe as we know it. Roger has this kind of otherworldly affinity for languages and speaking, and then Dodger has this otherworldly affinity, I don't know what else to call it, for like math and equations. And we're following them throughout like basically their infancy all the way up to their young adulthood. They are being monitored, and like they were born with the purpose of destroying the universe from these, like that purpose is coming from these gods in human form who are terrifying. They're monitoring Roger and Dodger closely throughout their entire lives, and they're trying to keep them apart. And the book follows them as they, you know, find their way together over and over again, despite these gods that are trying to keep them apart. This book is really cool in what it does with the structure. In scene 1, chapter 1, we're dropped in to this very violent and brutal scene that Roger and Dodger are in. And then the entire story, we are winding our way closer and closer to that scene, which we know is at the end of the world and at the end of the universe. We just don't know how they get there. And that structure made it so compulsive. And then also just like on, I don't know, an overall vibe level, I loved the way that Seanan McGuire wrote this. I was on the beach when I read this, but I was not like on the beach. I was, when I was reading this, completely wrapped up and entranced in the world that was Middle Game. Roger and Dodger are such easy characters to root for, and they left claw marks in me, as so many of the characters from my favorite books did this year. And I am just really excited to have enjoyed a Seanan McGuire. My 6th favorite book of the year is a book called Trust by Hernan Diaz. This is a novel that is set against the backdrop of a 1920s New York, and you're following this man and this woman and kind of their relationship as, well, you're following their lives separately, and then their relationship when they meet each other and how they meet each other, and then their eventual marriage, and then how that kind of spans out. The man is very involved in like financial things, and he's kind of a part of the foundation of Wall Street in New York. And if you are bored already, so am I. I would have never picked this book up if that's what I knew the premise was. I don't know, just a book that can make something like that so tantalizing to read about. It couldn't not be on my favorites of the year. Really, what this book did so well was give you a masterclass in getting the same story from different perspectives. There are 4 or 5 different parts of this book, and in each part you are getting the same or similar story from a different perspective, but it's not always just the character perspective that's shifting, it's also the modality of storytelling that is shifting as well. The fact that one storyline, and not only one storyline, but one storyline about like banking can get retold in these different ways and just have me on the edge of my seat is incredible. Because so much of the story centers around Wall Street, it obviously has themes of like money and power, but then there's this extra layer of how those themes of money and power can impact relationships. And I don't know, I just loved it so much. I will say I listened to this entirely through the audiobook, and I 1000% would not have finished this book if it weren't for the audiobook. So much of the language is very reminiscent of like the way that they would talk and speak and write in the 1920s, and that's just not something that I usually read. You know, that's not writing that I read, that's not how I talk, that's not what I listen to. So the beginning was dense for me to get through, and I almost gave up. And I'm so glad that I didn't, and I'm so glad that I had the audiobook to kind of get me to a point that I couldn't stop. And I just think that it's so sad that there are some people that would tell me that this didn't count because I listened to it instead of reading it with my eyes. You would take one of my favorite books of the year away from me just because I read it through audiobook? Come on. Okay, moving on to my fifth favorite book of the year. I'm going to talk to you about, I have the physical copy of this one, The Eyes and the Impossible by Dave Eggers. This is told from the perspective of a dog named Johannes. You can see him there on the cover. He lives in this kind of seaside urban park, and he is the self-proclaimed eyes of the park. He runs around the park his entire day, and he interacts with squirrels and seagulls and ducks, and at the end of each of his days, he kind of reports his findings to the bison, who are kind of the ancient wisdom keepers of this park space. And the perspective, I am like not someone who I'm like, ooh, a story told by animals, let me pick this up. But my favorite thing about this was being in Johannes's head. The way that Dave Eggers captures the voice of this dog is just, there's something that really, really stuck with me through it. There are lines in here, I wrote one down, hang on. There's lines that Johannes says, things like, I am not bitter, I am a comet, that, I don't know, it really, really just stuck with me. And it was a true blue adventure story. And I just don't think that I'm ever not going to have a middle grade book on my favorites of the year list, because this is what middle grade can do. It can take a seemingly simple story about animals, but then add in these larger than life themes of friendship and protection and what it means to like have your entire life be so, I don't know, entrenched in this communal space of this park. And I get that it's like a middle grade book, and so middle grade children will be reading it, and maybe, I don't know, maybe they won't get all of that, you know, from reading this, but I also do think that this is one of those middle grade books that is sweeping, and its audience is like any age. The next book, my number 4 favorite read of the year, is one that I also have physically. It's A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This book is set in Afghanistan during 2 starkly different time periods, one of them in pre-Taliban rule, and then one of them like in a post and during Taliban rule, and kind of you're getting to see the Taliban take over. There are 2 different women's stories that we are following in here, and then the eventual tragedy that causes their lives to converge, and then we are seeing their relationship form and become stronger and just go into something that is so incredibly beautiful. This is a modern classic, and rightfully so, and there were so many times during this story that I had like this isn't the right word, but I don't have any other word for it other than guilt. Like, this was published, I think, in 2007, and I wasn't reading it until 2024, and I just sometimes would get I don't know, angry with myself for not having picked it up sooner. But then it's also, I'm glad that I just picked it up when I did. The reason that it is a modern classic is because unfortunately it is still extremely and profoundly relevant to today's Afghanistan. And these two women in here were written so beautifully. They were so vulnerable and they were so flawed in the way that they kind of treated each other. And it is in their flaws that they like were perfect. They were the perfect characters. I am someone who like I am a character-based reader. So much of my reading this year, I feel like it was the writing that made it a favorite, and like this is no exception. But what sticks out the most to me from this book are these two women and the relationship that they had and the sacrifices that they made for one another. And if you were someone who, like me, kept putting this off because you're like, well, like, how could I have not read it by now? Don't get that out of your mind. Pick it up. It is so entirely worth it. Okay, we've made it to my final three, my top 3 books of 2024. Coming in at number 3, I'm gonna talk to you about Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey. We, in this story, are following a woman who at the beginning has set out to track the flight of this specific species of birds. She's tracking what she believes to be their final migration pattern. This book is set in like a very near future, honestly, just like a hair's breadth away from our present timeline to where species of birds are dying out. In order to complete her mission of tracking these birds, she has to team up with this boat crew, and it is through her relationship with these people that there's an eventual found family that's really, really special. And that's kind of the present, but a lot of the book is just centered around this woman, and we're getting, you know, flashbacks to her past with her marriage and then her childhood as well. And we really are just at the mercy of her narration. We as the audience know that there are some deeply tragic things that have happened to her, but we're just not necessarily sure how and when and what they are even. And that's what kind of propels you forward in the storyline of this book. Charlotte McConaughey is a writer that I like. Reading this confirmed it. I think that Once There Were Wolves made it onto my favorites list a few years ago. And there's something so just compelling about her writing. Both stories, this one in particular, is so high up on my list just because it's so unlike anything that I've ever read before. You do get a very large cast of characters in here, and both the characters from this boat setting in the present, and then there are characters, you know, from her past that are so profoundly real. There were times that I really did forget that I was reading a book, and it more just felt like I was following the life of someone in real life. And any author that can do that, like, I have to commend them. My number 2 favorite book of the year is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is the story of Circe, who, like, I think is most commonly known for her interactions with Odysseus in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I'm gonna be the first to admit that I didn't really ever have any interest in this, or I guess was intimidated to pick it up just because I don't have any knowledge of like classic Greek mythology. And I want to say that I feel like that is like one of the things that contributed to my love of this book, because I really had no knowledge of Circe and her life from a mythology perspective. There were some points in this story that were so salacious to me. Like, there were chapters that ended, this isn't a spoiler, but like there were certain chapters that ended with like, and that's how they became lovers. And I remember like jaw dropping, hand to my heart, just like, it was so intriguing because I didn't know this story. And I don't even know if like everything in this book matches the way that it happened in mythology. Like, I don't know how much Madeline Miller had to invent, but I'm just gonna say that like, I don't even care, because the only version of mythology that I care about is Madeline Miller's version of mythology. So much of it is her reflections on isolation and being alone. She is alone for a lot of time in this book on her island. And that being said, she does get to interact with other people and other gods and Greek heroes. And it's in those interactions that I grew to love this book. But really what made me appreciate it was being inside the mind of Circe and just the reflections on like womanhood and then motherhood. There are singular scenes that have stuck with me, and I can't I don't know, I feel like I'm getting out of breath. Even I can show you, like, here are my notes. I feel like my notes on Circe are just like so much shorter because the impact on me like goes beyond words. Thinking about sacrifice and what sacrifice means and the way that it's conveyed through her story in this book is so good. And the way that I love this book is, I don't know, it's different than any other way that I've ever loved a book before. And now I can't wait because this is my first Madeline Miller. And from the looks of it, she's not done writing these Greek stories and she has more out that I can dive into, and I can't wait to do that. We've arrived at my #1 book of 2024, which was When the World Tips Over by Jandy Nelson. This is a book where we're following the Fall family. There are 3 siblings, the older brother and then the middle brother and then the youngest sister. And so we're following all of their perspectives, and then the story really kicks off when this kind of mysterious girl named Cassidy has interactions with each of them separately, and she kind of comes into this Northern California vineyard town where they all live. We're following all of their perspectives, including Cassidy's perspectives. But this is a multi-generational story. So we're getting their present timelines, but then we're also getting stories from their past. And then we're also getting their parents' stories and their great-grandparents' stories. And then generations removed from that, we're getting those stories as well. The multi-generational stories that are told in here, when I was reading them, I just kept having the thought that like, this seems like something that would take someone a lifetime to write. So like on a macro level, we have that going on. And then on a micro level, the sentences that are in here, like one sentence alone would take me and anyone else months to think of. And the fact that Jandy Nelson just has these beautiful, luscious, delicious sentences stacked up one after another is something else in its entirety. I want to reference my Goodreads review, which is just 1 sentence long and did get featured on the Penguin Teen Instagram account. So that's fun. My Goodreads review of this was, this book is a 10-course meal that has been prepared for you by every single person that you have ever loved. And that's not what the book feels like. That's just what the book is. It is a feast. I think that if you're a person who appreciates food, there's just gonna be stuff in here that is so beautiful to read. If you're a person who appreciates art and music, there's gonna be stuff in here that's so beautiful to read. Usually, like, it's rare for me to make it through a book without crying, and I did not cry when I was actively reading this. I did cry immediately upon finishing it, just because I was so emotional over the fact that like I'm never gonna get to read this again for the first time. That's how important and impactful this story was to me. How could it not be my #1 book of the year, of all time? And there you have it, my 7 favorite books from 2024. I think before I go, I wanna leave myself and you with this, which is when I reflect upon reading and what makes me love it so much, I think what it really comes down to is my love of stories and storytelling. So even though this list comes from, like, the books on this list are all different genres, all different age ranges, all different storylines, all different moods and tones, but what they all have in common and what makes them all on this list of favorites is that they are all master classes in storytelling. I hope that something I said maybe intrigued you about one of these books or multiple of these books, I promise you that they're well worth your time. And I hope that you had a great year of reading in 2024. I hope that your 2025 year of reading, and then also just year in general, is off to a great start. I really want to start posting more on this YouTube channel this year. So hopefully that'll happen. I think that I said that last year and it didn't, but like, what are New Year's for? Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you hopefully very, very soon. Bye.